Welcome to the December 19th meeting of the Raleigh Appearance Commission. The Commission is charged with providing guidance, advice, and recommendations regarding the visual quality and aesthetic characteristics of the City of Raleigh. The members of the Commission are volunteers who are dedicated to the quality of design in Raleigh and represent a varied field of expertise. We will have staff review the staff report today prior to the applicant's presentation and identify the administrative alternate findings that the applicant will need to address. If you're presenting a case today, we ask that you would please keep your presentations to 10 minutes. We have a Parks Commission board after this right at 6, and we have to cut off at 5:45, so we're going to really hold our time limit tight today. When you get to the podium, state your name and address for us, please. And once you present your case, including all of your required items, we may ask you questions, and then we'll table it for discussion internally amongst the Commission. After the discussion, we'll set forth a recommendation to the Planning Director for a final determination. And thank you. And let's see, first item on the agenda is AAD-24-198 West P Street.
Thank you. This applicant, as you may recall, this is a continuation from the December 5th meeting. The applicant is requesting administrative alternates for EDO sections 1.58 pedestrian access, 1.59 transparency. As this was deferred, there were concerns from the Commission mainly about the street front on P Street, the entrances for the hotel and the space in between the two buildings. And the applicant has revised a set of plans which are ahead of you, in front of you, and this as well presentation. There is a slight change, I believe. Is this the one that, Lee, was this updated in the print version? Okay, so it's what you have in your print version is what they brought forward.
That's correct. Okay.
So the as I mentioned before, in terms of the pedestrian access, the findings would be that the approved alternate meets the intent of the street-facing entrance regulations. Number 2, that it conforms to the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans. Number 3, the pedestrian access point is easily identifiable by pedestrian, customer, and visitors. Number 4, recessed or projected entries or building elements have been incorporated into the design of the building to enhance visibility of the street-facing entrance. And number 5, that the pedestrian route from the street and bus stops and from other modes of public transportation to the entrance is safe, convenient, and direct. In terms of transparency, the findings include, number 1, that the alternate meets the intent of the transparency requirements. Number 2, that the alternate conforms with the comp plan and any adopted city plans. And number 3, the street-facing building facade utilizes other architectural treatments to create visual interest and to offset the reduction in transparency. I'm happy to answer any questions. The applicant is here for the presentation.
All right.
Good afternoon. I'm Don Nicholas from Klein Design, 125 North Harrington Street. This is Seaward Station Parcel A. We are going to quickly go through the images that we provided for clarification to speed things along. After your feedback, we studied having stairs directly from the sidewalk down to the recessed door here. We found head clearance was less than optimal for a major entry. The better idea was to direct the entry toward the corner, identified by a canopy, accent materials, and signage. We opened up the dimension of the entry by providing planters. The planters provide interest, a clean design aesthetic, and a public seating opportunity. At the courtyard access, we were able to act on the Commission's suggestions by creating a second landing, turning the lower steps parallel to the street. The steps are more inviting. They provide seating opportunities without obstruction of travel paths. Dark concrete was used here to help clarify courtyard access from flanking buildings. Hotel and resident guests will be able to feel a part of the urban activity. Pedestrians will also feel welcome to explore the hotel lobby and visit the restaurants. At the main hotel entry, we wanted to show the level of activity that will happen between the retailers and the hotel, activating the street and creating a new node for the city.
Is this on the Seaboard Avenue or Seaboard Station?
Yes,
Road?
Okay. We are, for transparency, we are a bit shy of meeting the requirements partly due to the sloping streets and the areas selected to be measured, but we feel we are meeting the intent of transparency when considering the whole facade as perceived as at street level. We feel for pedestrian access that we've created a very interesting and enjoyable pedestrian experience at the 2 entry points proposed. And again, we are limited by the slope and grade and building code requirements. That will end my presentation. Any questions?
Can you go back to the middle, that one right there? Is that different than this?
Yes, we,
Okay, yeah, okay, that, I guess what you have in your packet wasn't the most updated one. I guess that might have come today.
that came on Tuesday.
Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
so that's,
Okay.
the one you're showing is. the-
It's what we're proposing,
Okay.
yes.
So, yeah, that is recent. I guess we didn't have the most updated ones in the printing.
I have a question about the planters. Are those actually on your property line, or are those overhanging into, public right-of-way space?
They're hanging over into the public right away.
Okay.
We're proposing to have a adjustment for those planters.
Okay.
About how far are they into the right-of-way?
1'6".
Carter, can you speak to if that's something that would be granted?
That would be an encroachment. I've seen more egregious examples.
Oh, yeah.
But I think probably would be most like, what I'd recommend is to include in your recommendation a condition that they go through the encroachment process for these to be included in the design. So.
And that if they're not successful in securing an encroachment, they have to come back?
Yeah, I mean, that would be be dependent on the successful implementation of that, yes.
Okay.
Is this a 14-foot sidewalk?
I think it's 16.
16?
16.
Mine is 1'6".
Yeah.
Ish.
Correct.
Now, are you dedicating any additional right-of-way?
Joe.
Relate to the right-of-way line, yes, we're dedicating additional right-of-way. I don't
Yes.
remember how much. Okay.
With the steps there as they are, what access do you have for ADA use?
The access for ADA will happen down here in the lower lobby. There's an elevator directly behind the doors, and they will take the elevator up to the first floor and
So what street entrance are we working with there? What street is that coming off of?
street entrance.
Peace.
This is Peace Street.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for Carter. Does that meet the requirements for an amenity area? Because it has to be accessible, but does it mean like through a building and up an elevator? Is that a permissible way to have an accessible?
Amenity area would need to be
The-
accessible.
There's another accessible entrance on Seaboard Ave
Yeah.
that is on the sidewalk.
That was through the pool area.
But that was the one that had you had to have secure access, right, to get through?
No, ma'am. This
Okay.
is a public entry. You can come right through here into the lobby, and it's right in.
Okay. And you can go from there all the way through the site, and it's not secured at any point where the
Yes,
public
ma'am.
can't pass through? Okay.
I was thinking there was a pool or something in there, is there not?
There's a pool in there, but the public can pass through the lobby. The pool is off to the side.
Okay.
They have a clear path through to those areas.
Is everything inside the courtyard area still as it was last presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone have any other questions?
With transparency, where are we falling short on transparency?
What's
I
your
see we
current
got a couple
percentage?
of alternates, but
The current percentage we have on which street? On P Street?
Let's start there.
On P Street, if we take the measurement from the first full level above grade, we meet the transparency requirement, but we do not meet the 3 to 8 foot requirement.
And do you know what your percentage is at that point?
It's 68%.
68 of the 66. Okay, thank you.
It looks like, and this is kind of getting in the weeds and being technical, but it looks like one of those blue rectangles covers over a proposed solid area,
No,
like
ma'am.
where the entry is.
Here?
No, up one. Right there.
Bottom left.
This is all open.
But the glass is,
The last time it was not, there was, well, yeah, there's
I mean, there's a
logo, it says
panel.
logo on it.
Oh,
Yeah, there's a
at
panel.
that point, yes, there's not glass at where the logo is.
right, I mean, it's a pretty big percentage of that zone that's shaded, so I think it might skew your numbers if your numbers are based on the blue.
We had
Polygons.
enough distance from the face of the facade to the back of that to consider that as transparent.
So it's a glass
It's
face
not,
front,
it's
and then
open.
It's
Does that work?
It's open and then it's further than 8 feet to that facade.
I mean, does that, Carter, we've not, I don't think,
I
ever
mean,
seen
if
that
it's an
satisfied.
open area, like a parking garage entrance, it would not be counted in the total calculation of that 0 to 12 feet.
right.
So that would pretty much come out of the calculation.
But in this case, it's just a recessed element of the building, it's not a parking garage, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, we've always seen it where the glass in the recess was what was being calculated, not the hole where it was inset.
Okay, I think we interpreted it as there would be an active street scene there, so it was transparent and our building facade stops 8
the
feet.
portion that is transparent, yes, I mean, as long as you know, and a certain percentage of it needs to be, you can look into it to 8 feet.
Yeah, but that, as that stands, I don't think the piece that says logo, I mean, that doesn't count into the transparency calculation.
would
You're
think not.
saying that logo is 8 feet back from
The planners.
the
Front plane.
face of the
Yes, sir.
planners.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Doesn't count.
matter.
To clarify where we have the calculations taken from, the top image here is from the ground floor plan from the UDO. We were asked to also consider the sidewalk as a calculation line.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how we are, I think, required to do it, is the bottom. So I guess my question in bringing that up for us is that I think we just have to be careful in looking at the straight numbers as calculated, because I think they may not line up exactly with how we're used to seeing transparency. So just keep that in mind as we look at transparency on this case.
Could the logo area be a window?
We could make some of it a window.
I mean, I actually think it's better
The
for
restroom.
entry.
Yeah,
that
it's
or
definitely
something?
prettier.
It's half restroom, half not.
Okay.
I mean, to do something different to denote entry, I actually think it's much better to have it have something besides glass there, because otherwise it just blends in with everything else. So I think that's a good move. It's just as we look at transparency specifically, I want us not to get hung up so much on the numbers, because I'm not sure that,
Yes.
I think what you're looking at, and some of this that they're proposing for the pedestrian entry requirements, is that, does it provide enough visual interest for you to
offset.
satisfy both
that's right,
alternates?
that's right.
And you may not have this calculation, but if you did confirm, if you would, you did include the logo space as part of your transparency total across the face of the building?
And also
Yeah,
the open seating area.
like I said previously, we included the opening, and we didn't take into consideration that back wall because it was greater than 8 feet.
Okay. And if we took that out of the calculation, do you know what about your percentages would be?
It would be a couple percentages less, so.
Just shy of 66, maybe like 64, 63?
But it's the same thing here.
I know.
So it doesn't, again, we got to stop looking at the
Okay.
exact numbers, because he's not going to be able to give that to us. That's true.
Okay.
All right. Do we have any other questions for the applicant?
only planters that are in the right-of-way are up at the middle entrance, or is it all the planters?
At the corner too.
It's, there's 2 areas.
Both areas? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And they're all the same?
They're all the same width.
Same thing here. That doesn't count either. Any other questions? If we have other questions, we'll ask you to come back up.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone here from the public who wants to speak about this? Okay, if not, we'll table it and have internal conversation. All right, so let's start, if you guys are okay with it, about talking about the pedestrian, the entrances, pedestrian access.
Better than it was.
Yeah, it seems like it's better than it was. They call out the area. I think it's really important to know that it could actually happen. So, I don't know, it sounds like the implementation of having it conditional upon approval as a design adjustment may not be feasible.
Well, it'd be an encroachment, so.
I think it's quite possible.
Oh, yeah.
The implementation of if it's denied, how do we get it come in here?
Ken could just deny it. I mean, it's conditional upon that, so, and we've done that in the past, that they have to, in order to satisfy something, they would need to
Meet
provide it down the
conditions.
line.
Would that go as well with the canopies? Those are
Yes.
protected into the right of way?
Yeah, but can't be, if it's a permanent encroachment, it would need to go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those to me are pretty important, to give it that signage area and then give it the entrance, the feel of an entrance and.
Yep.
I agree. It would all have to be approved to make
Yeah,
sense.
Yeah, so I would say that would need to be part of the condition as well.
I think the addition of the planters actually increases the visibility to that corner. It draws you to want to go to that. So that's good for pet access as well.
Yeah. Yeah, 1'6" planter is pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
They show somebody sitting on it, I don't know.
That's just, the 1/6 is just how much it goes into the right of way. I don't know the full depth of the planters.
Do you want to ask?
You want to ask him?
No. Is the planter 1'6", or does it go 1'6" into the right of way?
Into the right of way.
How big is the
How
planter?
wide is the planter?
From the building is up against the right of way, and then the planter comes up 1'6" to the face. So
Really?
it's just 1'6".
So it's a 1'6" plant.
It's only 1'6" wide. It doesn't extend up under the edge at all.
Can you get anything in it?
I mean, so we're talking like,
How you build it.
6-inch wide.
Side he's,
So-
the side he's sitting on is probably.
So the side, I'm sorry, so to clarify, the side in here is, it is extended into the
Okay.
building.
Oh, okay.
Cause it, yeah,
Yeah,
cause you have
yeah,
that
I'm sorry,
depth
yeah.
there,
Mhm.
yeah. It's just
where
really where
in
the steps
building,
go up.
the side.
Yes, sir.
okay. All right.
Cool.
I'm good with that.
All right. Do you feel like the access into the amenity area is sufficient?
I don't. I don't think that it's going to be something the public believes they're allowed to use.
Yeah, it's better.
It is better.
that- Scroll to that picture.
Would you mind?
Can you just go, we don't have a picture of it in our book, can we?
The steps with the amenity area,
Yeah,
right there.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about what kind of width we have between those buildings right there? Those columns and the building on the right? I mean, what kind of width are we talking about?
Approximately 15 to 20 feet.
From the standpoint of amenity area, the fact that you cannot see it at street level, that puts a hard stop for me, and I'm curious if, again, I don't know that the public's gonna think they have access to that.
Well, doesn't the mini area have to be handicap accessible as well?
Yeah, and that's
And it is from the other side.
Oh, it is from the other side, but
That's,
not from
that's
here.
what we
So if
were.
you go about a block and a half, you can get to it,
Or through the lower entrance in the corner, up an elevator.
and then go around.
Through the lobby of the hotel, you know. Okay, let's look.
But the facade where the glass railing and stuff is under the building, I mean, that's part of the amenity area, that's outdoor area as well. I mean, so it is opened up a little bit more than just the 15 feet or whatever is between the buildings. I mean, it is a little high. I don't know what's the finished floor approximately, where those people are, you showing those people walking in 6 feet or something?
Yeah, 6 feet, no more. Again, we have a severe grading slopage around the whole site. We can't, it would be not feasible to move that floor anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
We're also up against the high-rise code with the building height.
And remind us, if you would, in the amenity area, what's available?
There's a restaurant in the
Just
amenity
outdoor
area.
dining area?
My name is John Felton, Director of Design for Klein Design. This is where the hotel guests would sit. It's adjacent to a bar restaurant that's managed and run by the hotel. It's also where the residents from the multifamily, from the boutique residential can come down and be part of that activity area. We do, people can go into the hotel and dine there, have a drink, or go through to the front street. So it provides access way beyond what just an entry would be to the building.
But it's primarily for outdoor dining. Is that a safe?
The area that you're looking at there would be some casual seating, so people could hang out there, bring their drinks out, instead of kind of hanging at the street. What you can't see back beyond, there's a barbecue area, there's some tables, there's a kind of a community table. Then you get to the pool fence, and then the pool that's sort of in that space between the two L-shaped buildings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's move on and talk about internally transparency, and we can come back and actually do the findings and work our way through how we either, agree to that one or not. I have a little bit of a tough time with the transparency just because the way the calculations are presented to us, I don't think is based on how they're actually required to be taken. So we're just going to have to look at it from a does it meet the intent, since we're not going to have necessarily the numbers to go by like we would normally want to look at. To Carter's point on the Seaboard Station Drive side, the entrance to the parking deck is even shaded blue, and that's not allowed to be counted as part of that. So it's another piece where that's kind of a challenge, right?
To quickly clarify, we didn't.
You didn't include that
We
in your
didn't include
numbers?
that. It just accidentally got shaded.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. So that helps a little bit on that facade, right? A lot of the challenge, I do think from this particular site, well, number one is because the floor along P Street, the floor level really plows right through where you would want the pedestrian access and the activity to be. And so that's really what everything I think is working against, is that floor level location. And so I think our charge is to, as a group, decide whether we think it still meets the intent. And I'll read it for us. The transparency requirements are intended to lend visual interest to street-facing building facades for both pedestrians and building occupants and minimize blank wall areas. And one of the findings, which I think is what we're really discussing, doesn't meet the intent. So that's one thing. But the second is the street-facing building facade utilizes other architectural treatments to create visual interest to offset the reduction in transparency. So that's really what we're trying to, I think, determine. Is have they done that effectively?
Oh, that they have.
Yeah, I feel like we asked them to make a better, more visible entrance, and they did that,
Mhm.
and possibly at the cost of less transparency, but that's kind of what we were asking for.
And I think it requires it to set it apart from the rest of the facade. Like, you're
Yeah.
not going to notice it as entry unless there's some move like that so it lends visual interest to help offset the transparency reduction. And I do think the area that's open to seating or dining, even though it may not technically count in the transparency requirement, the activity definitely will add visual interest to that facade at the street level. I mean, it's elevated, but there will be sort of an interconnectedness to that space.
And it helps that there's plants right below it,
Mm-hmm.
so that it doesn't feel like a big wall.
That breaks it up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important that there will, in the end, be plants there.
Mhm.
That's like transparency and.
I wholeheartedly agree. All right. So if you're good, let's work our way through pedestrian access and see if we can come to some resolution on that one. So first finding is the approved alternate meets the intent of street-facing entrance regulations. Street-facing entrance regulations are intended to concentrate pedestrian activity along the street edge and provide easily identifiable and conveniently located entrances for residents, visitors, patrons accessing a building as pedestrians from the street. And access points should be located or identified in a manner that's visible to the pedestrian from the street and be accessible via a direct path. So I have less of a problem with the corner now. The middle entry piece is still a little bit of a problem for me. I like how they've got the steps kind of cascading down. I like the planters. There are pieces that start to reach out and engage you. The open area where the dining is, that's a part of the restaurant, I do think helps greatly in that kind of connection to the street. So I'm inclined to say it meets the intent. I would have liked to have seen a little more engagement in that, and I really don't love the lack of accessibility into the space from that primary access.
The ADA is my greatest challenge, but I do appreciate the glass versus a hard product as we saw before. So that's nice as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't know what you would, kind of a head scratcher of how you make it better without blowing it up.
Starting over.
Did y'all talk earlier about just making the whole thing kind of a wide staircase straight up through?
We talked about that last time.
Last time, okay.
And I think this was the response to that, so that you get some cascading down in some section of, the stair itself facing us, but it could cascade down more. It might cut off access by the time you get the right amount of depth with steps up. It might cut off access to that outdoor dining area.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Yeah.
It doesn't help with ADA accessibility, but from a welcoming gesture, it certainly would go a long ways.
Minute 8 into the amenity.
Keep something living in the planters and stuff, 18 inches. I mean, I think it's important that something can maintain a life there that's not just gonna be
Dying
planter
every day.
dead,
Yeah.
Monkey
cigarette
grass.
butts in it.
Monkey grass.
I mean, it's cast concrete planters.
It'd be a steel.
You're
thing.
probably gonna get like 6 or 8 inches in
Right.
planting depth. You could, but it probably, I don't know, it'd be tough. The south facing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would also agree that tends to grab your attention as you're, from a pedestrian standpoint, and give a little more of an interest that this is an entry to the facility. So, I think that is important aspect of this area. I'm just wondering, you know, I mean, if we've got 16 feet, I mean, if we went 2 feet in or something, I mean, I'd be all in favor of that. I mean, 14 feet of sidewalks, plenty, and that's kind of the standard in some of the other areas and farther up the street.
Are you suggesting more substantial planters?
I am.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If that's something, I don't know if going further out is gonna make it harder to get through, but,
We could put it as a recommendation and a condition going forward if they have to get the.
So are you suggesting like a 2-foot planter?
I am, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And I'd suggest that they just look at materials and, I mean, to where we can maximize the amount of planter area. I think, you know, like you said, if it's concrete, you're not gonna end up with a lot. If it's Corten steel or something, then you might have more, right? Because
It's a thinner
you don't have
material.
that depth and that thickness. So I think if it was something like that, it would, you know, not to be play designer, but just maximizing the interest there,
The
amount
maximum
of-
planting
the
medium.
ability to have something survive
Yep.
in that area.
Yeah, and I mean, they're gonna want it to survive. It's at their 2 entrances.
Right.
But they may have a really hard time. because
We just want to set them up for a positive outcome, yeah.
Good as possible.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask this question, and I feel a little bad asking it, but as a commission, would we want to recommend, and I'll show this to everybody, like that the monumental stair actually fill the width to make it more welcoming? Is that getting a little too
So take away
prescriptive from our standpoint?
the right-hand side of the glass bit and just keep going up.
Yeah. What Jake suggested.
Is-
What you
I
do
don't
is
know.
just going straight
It's
up
basically monumental stairs.
from
that
in
we
between
want.
those buildings,
Good
instead of
straight up.
curving
So it's like
back.
Yeah,
they come
so
here, as
I think
opposed
it's
to-
only 1 or 2 tables that are there in front of there too, so, but what do y'all?
Yeah, how do you feel about that is the question.
Well, this is a building entry, but our primary entries are at, you know, the hotel entry and the restaurant entry are at the other side of our main street or primary street. You know, sometimes stairs like that just sit vacant, versus this, that is still inviting, but the area that you see there, where a couple of people are standing, that's activity area. So people can hang out there, you know, enjoy being in that space. I think when you do that stair, it just becomes
Filling
another
space.
monumental stair that,
Yeah.
you know.
I agree. I
doesn't
think it
do
also
much.
pushes people farther away
Right.
that aren't going to necessarily sit on the steps. It's going to push them back in even farther, and this might help them engage to the street a little bit more.
And from an activation standpoint, this different material is nice because it draws your eye versus a solid staircase.
Okay, I think those are very good points. All right, so do we want to, let's make a pass at
Let's
it.
do it.
Push back in a little bit farther, maybe that side stair that goes in the sideways could be pushed in towards the building a little bit farther. I don't know, but, you know, that's again,
Right. I think I would agree that we can push the stair back a little bit, maybe match the depth of the planter that we discussed on the other entry, and do like the idea of the core 10, that'd give you more plantable area. And if you want to help recommend to whoever we have to go to get the adjustments to come out 2 feet, we'd love that support.
We'll do it, for sure.
Yeah, the thinner the planter, the bigger the box. That'd be great.
Okay, all right, let's do it. The approved alternate meets the intent of the street-facing entrance regulations, and I think we've worked through that with these modifications and the conditions that it does. The approved alternate conforms to the comp plan and adopted city plans, so let's substantiate this. I think policy LU 2.1 placemaking could apply. I think policy,
2.2.
yep, LU 2.2 compact development.
Policy UD 23, activating street of mixed-use centers.
UD 1.3, 1.2.
yeah.
All right. The pedestrian access point is easily identifiable by pedestrian customers and visitors, and I think with the modifications that they've made, that is significantly improved. Recessed or projecting entries or building elements have been incorporated into the design of the building to enhance visibility of the street-facing entrance, and they've definitely done that since the last time. And the pedestrian route from the street and bus stop and other modes of public transportation to the entrance is safe, convenient, and direct. I don't think we have a safety problem with any of these.
Lee, if you'll include UD 46 with regards to activated public spaces, it also mentions specifically awnings. So I'd like to include that one.
All right, so whomever would like to take a stab at making the motion, let's do it with conditions, if that's okay. And then we'll work through what those look like.
So I'd make a motion to approve with the condition that the planters along P Street are approved by a design adjustment.
Or,
Well, I would probably specify a
Encouragement.
minimum width or depth, and just say that they would go through appropriate city process to, I'm thinking it's an encroachment, so,
Yeah.
but you could say the appropriate city process to obtain.
So I'd make a motion to approve with the condition that the planters go through a city process, the appropriate city process, and are
Maintain a 2-foot width.
Granted a 2-foot extension to the right-of-way.
and I would like to amend, if you'll let me amend your motion, to also include the canopy.
Condition as well, if I can amend, with regards to the planters, use of materials that will allow the most plantable space. We've suggested metal or tin versus concrete,
Corten, yeah.
core tin.
Second?
Before we take the final vote, will you read back what those conditions are, just to make sure
Sure.
we know what we're voting on?
I'm going to do them in 3 separate conditions. One is that planters are provided minimum of 2 feet in depth that go through the appropriate city process for approval. A canopy, I want to say at both sides of the corner? Okay. Canopies used, but you didn't specify a depth, did you?
I would say,
to
well,
match the planters.
at a minimum,
No.
because it could stick in, I'd
To
love
fo-
to see it
yeah.
even stick out even more, but at a minimum to be the 2-foot depth.
Carter, would it be more beneficial if we just specified that they would be equidistance in a linear plane to that of the planters?
I think if they could come out more, I'd be even
Yeah.
more in
Yeah,
favor of it.
I'd
so.
say minimum.
Minimum planters.
Do you want
And
us
use of materials in the planters that maximize plantable area.
And I'd like to amend it one more time to also say that if those conditions aren't met, that we'd like to see it again, if, or whatever process is required.
We'll craft these and make sure you look.
All right. With that,
Does he second that still?
you still second
Your
it?
amendment?
All right, with that, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. So let's move on to transparency. All right. Too many pages. So the approved alternate meets the intent of the transparency requirements. And I think we, in our discussion before, agreed that the offset in transparency was sort of made up for by other elements that lend visual interest to the space. The approved alternate conforms with the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans, so let's substantiate it again. Policy UD 1.2, architectural features, I think would apply.
Policy DT 75, ground level design.
Policy UD 4.6, activated public space. All right. And the street-facing building facade utilizes other architectural treatments to create visual interest to offset the reduction in transparency. And I think we agree that it does. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. It's clear y'all put in a lot of work since last time, and
Thank
it's
you for that.
significantly
Yeah.
better. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right. Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy.
All right. Will, Carter, who's up next?
121 Fayetteville Street.
All right, 121 Fayetteville Street. Please come forward.
I have to recuse myself from these.
National Bank.
Okay.
Okay. The applicant requested courtesy review for potential administrative alternates, 3DO sections 1.59 transparency and 3.33 building massing. The intent of the transparency requirements are intended to lend visual interest to street-facing building facades for both pedestrians and building occupants and minimize blank wall areas, not applicable to residential uses. We just went through transparency on the last one. In terms of the building massing, the intent is to manage the impact of tall buildings located near the public right-of-way. Step backs are intended to provide access to light and air at street level, mitigate wind impacts, and produce a consistent street wall and visually reduce the perceived scale of a building to avoid a canyon effect. The applicant is proposing to develop a 32-story mixed-use building on a 1 1/4 acre site zone DX40 shopfront. As proposed, the building does not meet the massing standards that require a 15-foot minimum step back between the 3rd and 7th floor on both Fayetteville Street and South Wilmington Street facades. The applicant is considering a request alternating the building massing standards. The applicant has the information in his presentation. I think it's also worth noting that additional alternates may be need to be considered depending on the proposed design. This really talks about build to along Fayetteville Street because some parts of that first floor facade are recessed. So I think that's something that they can speak to in the design, but it might need to, when they actually come through, request a building alternate. But that would also need to be confirmed with our development services folks. As well as potential for a blank wall, depending on the materials used to clad the parking deck levels. So in terms of the findings for a blank wall, the first one is that it meets the intent of the building massing regulations. Number 2, that it conforms with the comp plan and adopted city plans. Number 3, that the approved alternate uses a change in building materials to mimic a change in wall plan, that the most substantial and durable materials are located at the bottom floors of the building. Number 4, if the approved alternate proposes a building setback behind the sidewalk in lieu of a required step back, resulting open space includes public amenities such as seating areas, trees, landscaping, or outdoor dining. And number 5, that the building contains architectural treatments for delineating the base, middle, and top of the building. Happy to answer any questions. The applicant's here to make presentation.
Okay.
Could we also pull up a couple of files?
I can't put that into the machine. It's got to be a city one. Is there something different than what you have on there?
There is, for the pedestrian connector,
Okay.
just in case something comes up.
Is there a way you can email them to me?
I can, or Brian, maybe you can, yeah. Sorry about that.
No.
Oh, no. I'm having a hard time orienting myself.
Probably go
on the
through
plan
and we
because there's
Yeah,
street
that's
names.
fine.
Terrace, who cares about terrace?
Hi, my name is Sanjeev Patel. I'm a principal at Dudapin Architects. And we brought a model along with us because sometimes drawings and renderings can be hard to read. And so what I thought I would do is maybe once we get to the elevations, maybe instead of referring to the drawings, we can just go to the model and I can talk a little bit more about the materials. So what I'll do is just maybe give you a quick intro to the project, talk briefly about the concept, and then we can dive into the ground plane and some of the concerns.
And I'm going to interrupt for just a second and just say we have like very short time, so
Fast.
just make
Okay.
it as poignant and quick as you can.
Okay, understood.
Thank you.
So What's shaded is the site. It is roughly 210 feet by 240 in terms of proportions. We placed the tower to the south edge of the property, mainly to step back as far as we could from the Capitol. The historic building was something that we thought was very important. In terms of the massing of the building, we try to break down the massing. It's a sort of a bundle of 4 volumes that slip and slide. We're trying to break the plane and delineation between the parking and the office. And we're treating the retail base very differently on all sides. So this sort of explains the more than 100 feet that we are stepping back from the north side of the property. And this is sort of the view of the Capitol. This is the north edge of the property right here. So we are stepping back, I want to say 110 feet, but to be safe, over 100. And so, just shifting over to the model, in terms of materiality, we're trying to delineate it here is along Fayetteville Street. We've got a canopy, and in terms of the base, middle, and top, we've got the transparency of the base. We do have a perforated metal panel on the majority of the garage, from here up to here. But we are trying to break that water line by bringing elements of the tower down, especially at Fayetteville Street, trying to announce the front door. We have some articulation of fins that happen right at the top of the 7th floor, roughly. Kind of pick up on some of the data lines of the buildings. So we're looking at a couple of different colors and profiles of metal panel that would be perforated, so we can get our open air requirements for the garage. But trying to dematerialize and break down the scale as we come down from the tower. The 4 corners, like I mentioned, are 2 opposite corners are articulated differently with the skin. And everything that you see here would be the curved wall. We are trying to break it up both in terms of the width that express the wall, Fayetteville Street and Wilmington side. So that kind of gives you an understanding. There is an amenity floor here, and a terrace on the other side. So that further breaks down the mass. What I'll do now is just maybe quickly go to the ground floor plan. These are some views along Fayetteville, night, day. And then this is the retail that we are pushing back to create an outdoor seating area. Oops. It's the ground floor plan.
Everything below it is not okay. Anything but the parking.
Looks like the ground floor plan's not in here.
No length, there's no
Um,
either.
I apologize, we don't have the ground floor plan in this file here, but one thing I wanted to mention was the materials of the lobby are brought out to the street around the elevator core, so it's a travertine with LED lights. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that along the pedestrian corridor that connects Wilmington with Fayetteville, we are pulling in at the corner lobby pulling in the building facade to kind of open up that, that pedestrian passage.
Carter, in the pack that you had, I guess, shared with us so that we could review it, before the meeting today, there was a ground floor plan, which I think is absolutely critical for us to be able to give any feedback whatsoever. Do you have the ability to pull that up and put it on the screen so we can talk about it?
Oh, but we have, I mean, it should be in the package. I don't know why it's not in there.
There was a scan pages on this. That's from like 2014 to. Wouldn't that piss him off closed or is it open?
Yeah, it should be 13. This
Access to 15.
yeah.
Perforated metals.
I see a car here. Well, you're not gonna get your, it has to be 50% open.
Well,
considering
that's one of the things we can come back with.
Yeah, we can explain that if we need to.
Yesterday.
Is this considered an open parking deck, or is it,
It is.
so you're gonna maintain 50% open
Correct.
with perforated panels?
Correct, yeah, and we're looking at some panels here.
That's the car. These are these two. So it's two separate parking
All the different profiles, we're still working through the final. So the panel themselves will have, fairly good kind of articulation and perforate them. So it's kind of delineates the dark and the light.
Right.
So can I ask some questions, since we've got a plan that we're kind of referencing over here. If you guys want to look at it, you might want to kind of crowd around this way. Sort of fundamentally from the ground floor plan,
Yeah.
it's like 90% service, 90% not active use. The thing that sticks out in my mind about it is you have two parking decks with
Correct.
two parking deck entrances.
Correct.
Is there a reason why you're doing it that way as opposed to just having one parking deck?
Well, the two decks sort of service two different buildings. So the north deck services the Wells Fargo Tower across the street. The deck that's below this new proposed tower serves that tower.
But why does that, like from a, as we sit and try to understand how to make the public realm as good as possible on the ground plane, that key piece, I think, is working against the whole kind of development. Is there any way, I guess is my question, to figure out a way to merge those two so that we can minimize parking deck entrances and circulation and just, make it as good as possible?
Can I talk?
Yeah, sure.
Jason Frost, I'm with Preferred Office. So today, that deck has two entries. It has one entry and one exit on it. The only thing we've added, and that's for a 750 car deck, and the only thing we've added incrementally is the loading dock space back there. The tough part of this is, and we can go, we have run it with parking consultants, but this deck's going from 750 to 1,400 spaces. And so between the queuing, onto one way of Wilmington, you really need two entries. And so the tough thing is the loading dock, right? That's the incremental add that's not there today. And with a 32-story, 400,000 square foot office building, we have to have a loading dock.
Sure.
What we are trying to study, I don't know that it creates any more active use, just because of the number of bursts that you had to have for loading and unloading. But what we are studying after meeting with some of the development services folks is keeping necessarily inside the building the same size of the loading dock, but necking down the entry into that. And development services was of the opinion that they may allow, like smaller FedEx on-street dedicated unloading and offloading. So we are looking at trying to curtail that. but I don't know that we could necessarily, with that volume of cars, lose a whole opening.
This is more to building massing now. It is very challenging for me to get my head around having a dead zone in the whole building.
Right.
Of just dedicated to parking. Is there any possibility of putting some of it, not all of it, but some of it below ground to offset the negative of all the parking above ground to serve the building?
I mean, it becomes a challenge with ramping, quite honestly. We got to ramp down and up.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have another opening,
Yeah.
right,
Mm-hmm.
to get down.
Mm-hmm.
And we really don't, because this deck is staying, you really don't have anywhere where you could get an up and get a down as well, in that. And the maximum that you would get, you know, going below grade is probably 2 floors.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably talking about, we're averaging about 72 to 74 spaces per floor. So you're talking about moving 140 spaces. And I don't know how you would get down, right? I physically don't.
I think you would have to use the footprint of both of those buildings and go
Right.
down 2 stories.
Right.
So I guess for me, when this building is built, it's going to be here for 100 years.
Right.
And the city's going to deal with parking zone for quite a long time. And I would love it if there's a way, and this is, you know, it's courtesy review, so we can talk about it, but when it comes for the full review, we're going to have to be looking at base, middle, top, and how those pieces function, and how holistically, from a building massing standpoint, those pieces play in. If there's any way at all possible to utilize that whole footprint and get as much parking underground just to reduce the giant stack of parking at that mid-important section along Main Street. I would love it if we could study that. And I don't know that that's even in the realm of reason. I understand all the pieces and parts that you're up against, but just fundamentally the city's going to have the building for 100 years, and it needs to play well in the city for 100 years. It would be
We're
nice.
also concerned about that, just from an aesthetic point of view, and which is one of the reasons why we brought the glazing down along Fayette.
What's behind that? Is it just glazing as a facade on top of the parking?
It's literally trying to make the parking deck look like an office building.
Correct.
And
So that's
Yeah.
going all the way down to the ground level there.
That's the Fayetteville side you just turned.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes,
Okay.
Street side, go over to the street side again, trying to do the same thing here, trying to break that data between the parking.
Mm-hmm.
From ground to glazing, what's the approximate footage there or stories?
Say that, what do you mean?
From, the bottom there, from the ground to the glazing.
That's 7 to
7
there,
stories, 8.
where he just touched, right?
Sliced out of the last one, so yeah, 13.
The first one you sent me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get an email through.
So you have,
It was too big.
what, 14, about 14 of
14
parking?
above the lobby, yes, sir. And it's a double helix, so that you're really only, according to how you look at it, 7 to 8 cycles.
Right.
Versus a traditional helix deck. And, you know, it's really, we're dealing with constraints of, you know, that's all we could get in a 120 by kind of 210
Right.
footprint.
Talk about delineation.
What do you mean?
Ground floor is up, I think, go through some of the other.
So I've said a lot already. What do you guys want to?
Go ahead. He was going to talk a little bit about that
Okay.
plan.
Just to reiterate, so we've got retail along the north deck here.
What
facing-
depth is that, just out of curiosity?
Maybe 30.
It's not as deep as
Yeah.
we would like it.
Yeah.
If we were redoing that deck, we would definitely
Increase it.
Yeah.
increase that
Maybe
depth.
to 60 or so.
Good. And we've had several meetings with the city trying to figure out any way that we can. It all boils down to, we're in a really tough predicament in that the 150 building relies on this deck to keep those customers, and we've invested, as you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in Raleigh. We're between that and Cap Trust, and you got to keep those customers happy, so it's a balance. But if we can find a way, we would definitely want to make that retail a little deeper. Same thing on Wilmington Street.
Right.
And we've stepped back, we've made our retail considerably deeper in the new tower, as well as stepping back about, I think, 12 to 14 feet to create an outdoor dining opportunity out there. And Sanjeev was also trying to point out there should be a rendering, but
yeah,
we're significantly from that corner back, we're totally redoing that connection between Wilmington and Fayetteville from a pedestrian standpoint, from a seating standpoint, from an activation, hardscape, landscape, et cetera. I don't know that we get credit for that from a glazing, open area or I'd call it
pedestrian amenity or
but
public amenity.
We are spending a lot right there to enhance what's there today.
The elevator bank that's on Fayetteville Street,
Yes.
can it go inboard so it's not big blank wall on sidewalk?
So
Yeah, no, great question, and that is something that we have studied long and hard. It really comes down to the ramping, the double helix of the parking garage. We have 2 crossover points of the parking, the 2nd and 12th levels, and that the core sort of gets into that connection point.
because that's when you go right above that and you start connecting with that ramp,
Yeah.
you're in the drive aisle
Yeah.
of the parking deck, and that's kind of,
And so, yeah, getting traffic comfortably around the corners with the core in the center was really challenging. And so what we've done is, pulled it to the outside, and honestly, we think it actually brings the activity of the pedestrians closer to the street by having the elevators right there versus deeper into the block. You sort of, once people walk in, it's sort of they're, into the lobby, and this keeps it very close to the street. The glazing there is all very transparent. There's no coating, low-E coating on there, reflectivity, because of the deep canopy that we have. And we are pulling the finishes of the lobby out to the street to kind of blur the boundary between indoor and outdoor. So sort of the experience of the lobby really begins underneath the canopy. And I can show you a photo. So here's a better view of that.
we had that as spandrel glass, and there was concerns about how that works maintenance-wise, about how it looks day to day.
Yeah.
And we thought if you brought, since you already have in plane the travertine of the lobby, if you were to bring that out, it's a connection to the lobby, that it would be a better look. We've looked at it both ways.
Yes, I mean, spandrel glass isn't going to help.
Right.
The issue is it's a solid thing at the
Uh,
street, so I
you
get why you did it, so.
We hit on it every day. I mean, we've run this thing 43 ways from Sunday.
It could be an art piece or something. I mean,
Yeah.
it could be
I
something.
mean, even just a really high-quality material,
Yeah.
I mean, spandrel glass is pretty awful as a
Yeah,
material.
and so we're right now, this is real dimensional stone. It's gonna be travertine that we're using inside. And so we feel like, bringing that sort of high-level finish out to the street is gonna be a nicer quality than.
But to your point too, we also have looked at, and you can see it in this picture, we want these murals, right, to grab out and take as much as possible. So in both of the offsets where you come in, we've said, let's grab that pop of color and, grab that mural or grab that art piece and make that look good. And those could actually come all the way out, if they needed to. Right now, we show them step back a little bit.
Or
but
could it
that's-
be the elevator bank that's the art piece itself? I mean,
As opposed to the travertine.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, another area for art that we're considering is the pedestrian passage. And you can.
Do you have to?
Yeah.
render it?
Did that email go through? Really? Okay.
So we have art, going down through here, and it doesn't show good, right, because of the scale of this, but this is a definite area where our building faces you know, kind of the street, you know, good view. And so we have looked at an art installation here. We've also looked, as you trek down through here, we've also looked at art installations down through there as well.
Great.
To kind of bring you down through there, as well as kind of lights that are architectural lights that would be more on a pole, so that you can activate and really gives a good glow down through there.
And it looked like it was more meandering,
It is, yeah.
which is, I think, key to kind of draw people down there, and it's not trying to get from point A to point B as fast as you can. It's more of a,
There's some bench seating and things like that. I mean, we're really trying to activate this whole pathway.
So we only have 10 minutes left before we're going to be booted out of the room. And as nice as the pedestrian level is, I can't get past building massing. Like
Right.
the big challenge that we have is the building massing. So I don't, like,
Agreed.
it doesn't matter how much artwork or how transparent the lobby is or any of those things are
Appreciate what you're
big.
doing.
Are big, what you need to hear from us and what we need to have a discussion, I think, about in the last 10 minutes is how we address building massing in a way that we can get behind and recommend approval.
What is that when you say building?
That is not having step backs, not having
Undulation.
articulation, but it's also the base middle top, which is where that parking component is really not helping me get behind it as a concept.
So,
wind zones and.
you know, one of the things, and we've talked about it with, when we met with planning and such, is, you know, and it boiled down to open area too. I mean, we could have pulled the building back further, right? But Fayetteville is already such a wide sidewalk that, you know, planning was like, no, don't pull your building back further. I mean, there's plenty of room. You know, Fayetteville is a unique street compared to others. And so we've already, you know, got off of that, and we have successfully used this treatment of a canopy numerous times so that, you know, you really don't feel, the pedestrian doesn't feel this, because what they have is the experience below the canopy because it pops out proud of the building. So, I mean, I guess I struggle with the massing in that I don't know what necessarily, you know, I mean, if we pulled this back in 10 feet, we've got issues with our drive aisles, right, on how that works.
Well, it's not at the ground plane. I'll read it.
The building,
Yeah, no, that's what I'm talking about. So between 3 and 8, right, which is our parking deck. And so if we bring those in, we condense the helix in the parking. Well, you just cut out you have to basically cut out all those spaces because you can't move your core of the office. And you can't move your elevators for your garage. You can't move the core of the office. So really then you get down to a continuous drive aisle. If we bring the building in, you basically just cut all that parking out, which means we really need to go more.
Everything is coming down to the parking. So again, that's why I want to lean back and say, you've got to take both of those opportunities to get maximum efficiency across that whole site.
that's,
Vary some parking to reduce that problem, because at no point, I mean, I can't see a way, and we're going to have the same problem on Wilmington Street. You know, we're trying to get to the place where there's interest in the building massing. We have light and air at the street level. You know, the step backs are intended to provide that, and when we don't have that, hardship from parking or whatever isn't really what we get. It has, like, what does it do better than code to meet the intent?
their hardship though is that deck is existing, right?
Yeah, but we don't have hardship. Like, hardship is not part of our.
No, but they've got an existing deck, yeah, and they're trying to maintain that deck, right?
But I mean, we've, you know,
I understand what you're saying, but.
I mean, we've spent, you know, we could do this. So we could do what you're talking about, right? I mean, I'm not saying we can, but let's just say we had the right dimensions and we pulled it in. What we have done we've tried to spend the money to make this look differently and get the articulation that you talk about. I mean, we're spending a significant amount of money around this deck compared to what a lot of decks in Raleigh are, to try and provide, you know, some different articulation, some different look, that it's not a parking deck, you know, that it's an office building or whatever. So we've tried to offset that with costs, right? We were limited and constrained by our site dimensions. We've tried to spend money to get the architectural features that break it up. Because you can break it up by distance, but you can break it up by materials, right? So we feel, I can tell you my budget feels, we've spent millions trying to do that.
I guess some of the question is, there's the whole 3 and 8, story thing, but even at the 14th floor, there's still big places where it doesn't have maybe some of the articulation that maybe some people would like to see. And I don't know what that would be, but I think that's what some people are saying.
Yeah,
And I
It's
think
kind of hard to get over, is that, I understand kind of these bundled, and I like that, they kind of cant out and stuff. It's kind of fun, but you also have these big planes that just go all the way up, and it doesn't have a basement on top. It doesn't have that articulation. Even at the 14th, you could say, okay, we can't do it at the 8th because we've got parking restraints, but we've tried to do it at the 14th floor to try to get,
And what happens if you vary some parking, even if it's 2 floors?
Sure.
Does that start getting the articulation level down within the right region? Or can you squish it in a way? Probably. Parking dimensions are very much limited by, the loops and, so I do get all of those things. My big challenge is that we have a giant 7-story parking deck on Fayetteville Street. And I appreciate the glass, because the screening, on the Dillon and other places, like at night, you might as well not have it, because the light on the inside makes it invisible. So I think the glass is a significant improvement over screening, but I really think the problem is in the height of the parking above the ground.
Yeah, I think the other piece is just that fundamental idea of a parking deck that looks like an office building. I think that really stood out to me, and I think that's kind of one way to go if we have this height of parking. But it just occurred to me, kind of, if you're looking the way I think where I'm looking now from the Capitol, we're staying in the state Capitol. This is the first building we see. What are we greeted with there? And looking back at Fayetteville the other way, I don't think we have this scale of parking on Fayetteville to date.
Currently.
I don't think so. So it's kind of a first in that sense. And I think other projects we've seen, including other due to paint projects, I think we've done pretty well at addressing some of the kind of mitigating what the deck looks like. So we appreciate that. And I think let's just think even more outside the box, or just other alternatives for what those 2 facades could look like. I think the glazing is a step in the right direction. But other cities, we've seen living walls, we've seen artistic, the whole thing is a mural. It doesn't have to be that, but we have a lot of talented local artists that I think we could bring in at the scale of a facade like this that would make a statement different from kind of the sort of basic, like, let's make this not look like a deck. Let's make it look like something that we want to see still, from our state capitol building. So that's just kind of an invitation.
Are you talking Fayetteville and Wilmington? Fayetteville, Wilmington, and the deck facing the Capitol?
Those 2 facades on, so
Here.
the screens, no, the other 2.
These?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so those 2 parking deck screens, right? So if those facades, we can do our best to make it look like an office building, but are there other opportunities, to do some really large-scale, visually interesting stuff that makes helps Raleigh stand out? I think it's an opportunity for a statement. That's kind of
Agreed, and even the side with the pedestrian access that you guys are improving so well, that would be another visual interest as people are on that edge quite often.
So I'm hearing a couple things, so I want to
Yeah.
make sure. So if we go back, and we've studied, but we will study some more. If we go back and we figure out we are physically constrained, are you telling me that, you know, then we just need to be more architecturally pleasing to address the physically constrained? Because I got nods going both ways.
My I think the artwork, what Jake is saying, I think is wonderful.
Yep.
But I think as the very first step, like we don't love wedding cake step backs
Flat
that
wall.
completely meet the code. So that's not what we're advocating for. What we're advocating for is how do we mitigate the negative impact of the parking. My first preference is bury as much of it as you can, because that takes away the problem. Second is make something cool out of it, not just a screen that goes away at night. Make something cool of it. The glass on the front facade, I think, is very helpful. So it's sort of like an order of priorities of like, how do you mitigate the negative thing of this giant parking?
But I hear the burying, right, which is, call it 2 floors, 140 spaces.
Right, whatever that is, and then.
My problem is how to physically get, like you're.
That's still gonna be a challenge for.
Sure.
Right now,
Sure.
we don't like that there's 2 entries and a
Loading dock.
and a loading dock. If we're going down, there's gonna have to be 3 entries.
And I think that is a good question. It's like, as a commission, and really, you know, as an owner of the building, as a designer, what would you rather see? And if you've already got loading and you've already got refuse and it's already kind of not attractive, taking a couple stories off of the parking and
The retail out of Wilmington.
where's retail on the model of underneath the
So
tower?
right now, we have retail right here. So there's an entry, and a loading dock.
Yep.
So right now, this bay is retail. So in order to go down, we would have to take out the retail of Wilmington to open up an entry
To get down, to get to which parking, though? Where would the
existing?
no, where would the underground parking be in that scenario that you're describing?
I physically can't get here under this building because you've got a loading dock and you've got the entry going up, and that takes all of the space.
No, I get that.
Okay, so this is an existing deck. So physically, the only thing we could do, and I don't even know how you could feasibly do it, but you would have to take out the retail on Wilmington, dig down, and somehow come
Get to
under
that building. See,
this
that's what I,
building,
right,
A little
that's what I
tunnel
was.
to get over there.
Yeah.
you know, which is,
Expensive and challenging. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
lose a tenant.
I don't know how you do that. under
Exactly.
existing deck.
Yeah.
But again, in order to create a scenario where we can get below grade, I think you lose the Wilmington retail.
Which is pretty not great right now anyway, because look at what it's all surrounded by. I think it's one little teeny pocket, right?
Yeah, I'm not as hung up on getting underground. I'm more on the mitigation side. I think it sounds like it's going to be really challenging. If you do it, it's amazing in terms of going underground and figuring that out. But I think for me, it's, if we have to accept it the way it is, you know, let's see a few different looks at just being really creative with both of those facades that look up and down Wilmington. And I think that it's not a bad direction the way you're going. I think it's better than most decks in Raleigh, like you mentioned. But can we, like I said, can we make a stronger statement? Yeah.
And to the commission, from the standpoint of material change, if we, because everything right now is on a vertical plane, if we had some horizontal and some vertical attributes to this, would that be an improvement? Or do you think it's going to be the same effect we have now?
Maybe just more carving at upper levels, like not applied fins, but like cuts into the building. Like there's the one nice cut on the side,
Here.
right, that starts to help break down the mass. You know, if they're, right, if there's something like that, maybe on,
On the back side.
An open
Yeah.
air space.
yeah, that starts to, again, address the concerns
Yeah, I
that
really
the.
like this articulation here. I think it's nice.
A corner would be
Even that whole
amazing.
side, I mean, it cants out on the other side. It's just.
If you did a corner cut
Are you talking about a corner cut or a corner cut?
this direction, right there, that one, stop. You, up, somewhere, not necessarily there, but somewhere on that side, if you could open that
That's
space.
kind of the statement piece, like architecturally, I would preserve that and cut another spot.
And
I
when-
mean,
okay.
it's similar to a building we just reviewed from Due to Pain not too long ago, right?
Right.
That had kind of the same
Yes.
thing, had a very vertical element that really didn't meet the intent of the code, which was fine. I mean, I think it was a strong statement, and I think it could be a strong
But it made up
statement
for
here as
it
well.
in other
And you made
places.
for it, yeah, and that's what I think this side's doing very well.
It's
And
just
I don't
more
have
of
a problem
that.
with that.
And we can't be prescriptive in it.
Right.
The point is to carve it in a way that's architecturally nice to make up for, no. But let him decide where he carves it. It's just,
World-class architect.
That's right.
Let them go.
so from our perspective, it just needs to be enough to mitigate, again, it's about mitigating the blank wall and the sheer plane of it. And so wherever it goes, like I would not put it on that front corner because I think that is a pretty strong
think it'd
architectural
be-
statement. It is. It
And
is.
the
And
glass.
it's holding the corner nicely, but
And you could
somewhere
even-
back there.
Yeah, elongate it, if we're gonna use that wall, maybe a 50% building, and then off to what is my right-hand side.
But let him decide what it is.
Correct. Just some kind of cut in that wall, on that building side.
This is, building number 4 with Rod and Sandy. So,
Yeah.
I previously worked with Cousins Properties. So we have a long
History.
history with Duda Payne. They're very talented. We're tickled to death to be working with them.
So the moral of the story is mitigate, right? If you can't meet the prescriptive pieces of it, mitigate with some cool artwork, mitigate with some cool treatment, mitigate
Even if
with
it's not in
carving.
that prescribed 3 to 8 or whatever it might be, just, give us something a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Any closing remarks?
Just put the parking on top. It's fine. I'm just kidding. Get like that Carvana thing and just let them all ride up. I'm just kidding.
So much
Yeah.
about any building. It's just amazing. We can figure out from it.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Madam
Later.
Chair, actually, in further research, the Parks is not here at 6.
Okay.
They were last week.
Okay.
Okay.
City's main page wasn't updated. So there's not a time constraint. I know that you need to leave at 6, so, as I do.
All right.
Have one more?
We have one more review.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Same
much.
design team is on this next request too, so just.
Yeah, so we're not
swap
constrained by
out
6 p.m.,
developers.
so.
All right.
A couple
excellent.
of us are, but.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing, but okay.
It's Kirsty.
Not quite as tall.
603 South
Basically
Wilmington
the
Street.
same.
Looks very well detailed, though.
Squint, and it's great.
Last courtesy review of the night, 603 South Wilmington Street.
I've got this one. So this is for building massing. The intent of the building massing regulation is to manage the impact of tall buildings located near the public right-of-way. Stepbacks are intended to provide access to light and air at street level, mitigate wind impacts, produce a consistent street wall, and visually reduce the perceived scale of a building to avoid canyon effect. The applicant is proposing to develop a 12-story hotel on a .51 acre site within a downtown mixed-use 12-story urban general frontage conditional use zoning district. As proposed, the building does not meet the massing standards that require a 12-foot minimum step back between the 3rd and 7th floor on either the South Wilmington Street or East Lenore Street facades. The applicant mentions that step backs of 1 foot to 2 feet along Wilmington Street and 8 feet to 9.5 feet along Lenore Street are provided at the 5th and 6th floors. The applicant also states that the material changes are provided between the 1st floor and the parking decks levels at the 2nd and the 5th floor, and between the parking levels and the hotel levels, which are the 7th to the 12th floor. Helping to delineate base, middle, and top, the applicant has provided plans, elevations, and renderings to illustrate the proposed designs. It is worth noting that the additional alternates needed to be considered depending on the proposed design. Sorry, there are additional alternates that could be needed. These could potentially include build-to due to the increased setbacks of portions of the 1st floor facade along both Lenore and Wilmington, and blank wall depending on the material used to clad the parking deck levels.
Good evening. I'm Rafael Lopez. I'm with Duda Payne as well. As mentioned earlier, what we're looking to do is finding alternates into the massing. So with this first image here on the cover page, I just want for everyone to notice that one of the biggest things that we're trying to do to work with the intentions of the massing is pushing this face on South Wilmington as far back as we possibly can. So instead of a step back, we're doing a setback. What this is allowing us to do is also provide open amenity area for the pedestrian. The second main strategy that we're taking is using different materials for the ground floor, which we're of course using glass for transparency's sake. We're looking at perforated metal in the parking garage with some precast panels. We have a break at the amenity level, again with glass, and then at the hotel level, we're looking at using some metal panels with a color just to make sure that the building isn't as gray as it seems. So for a little bit of background, we're going to run through a couple of slides first. This is on the corner of South Wilmington and East Lenoir. So as you can see, basically around us, it doesn't seem like there's much going on. We have a parking lot, a flat lot to the north, a flat lot to the west, and if we sort of look at this diagrammatically, we can actually see that there's a lot of program around this site. We have the Historic District, Shaw University, the Duke Energy Center, and the FMB Tower right a couple blocks over. So on the ground floor, what we're trying to do, as I mentioned, is providing open amenity area along portions of Lenoir, Wilmington, and then we're also providing a small parklet here as a way to act as a buffer between the Historic District and this hotel. What we're also doing is providing different seating opportunities along this corner. And you can see how open the corner of Lenoir and Wilmington is, where we're almost providing sort of a miniature plaza along this building. We want to make sure that this corner, which is essentially connecting to the Historic District to downtown, is open and welcoming. So here in these images, you can sort of see, again, the amount of space that we're providing and how we're making sure that the building is somewhat coming down and interacting with the pedestrian. On Wilmington Street, here on this bottom left image, we're providing some sort of planters or vegetation between the office and the sidewalk, so there's a bit of a buffer there for privacy. We also have the bus station that's going to be right on Wilmington Street. So by creating this open amenity area, by setting back this face, we're making sure that there's enough room for people to walk back and forth. Here on the top right image, you can see again how we're trying to include some sort of bench on the streetscape. And what we're trying to do here, if you notice on the ground floor, we sort of have this angled plane. We're playing with the canopy to sort of create this forced perspective to really drag the people into the entry of the hotel and the office. And then along Lenoir, we're proposing putting a series of planters and benches so that we can activate that area. We know that we don't have as much space as Wilmington, but we are trying to make that as welcoming as possible on the north side. So as I also mentioned, we have the amenity level up on the 6th level. And this is mostly going to be used for the hotel, but we are intending for it to be public as well. So we are looking at creating sort of these focal points here on the corners so that we can have views to downtown. And again, as I mentioned, it's helping sort of with that canyon effect to help break these big massing moves that we're trying to achieve. So here's that rendering again. So as I mentioned, here on this corner of Lenoir and Wilmington, we want to propose that large sidewalk for open amenity. We did hear your comments as well in the previous for 121 about the parking garage and sort of creative ways of dealing with it. But for currently, we are showing sort of the perforated metal with precast. And then, of course, up above, we're using a slightly blue tone as a way to separate itself from the base. So we're really embracing this whole podium building typology for the hotel. So on the north side, you can see the amount of transparency that we're going to be providing with the hotel lobby and the office. You can see the amenity level is also going to be completely transparent. And we're hoping that we can sort of create these levels of population where people can really use the area up above and down below. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have sort of this small parklet here to the side where the historic district begins. On the east and west, we have a pretty similar language. Again, you can see here on the east elevation that we intend this to be used by the public and also by the hotel guests. There is the home too. It does welcome pets, so we do want to provide some area for the owners of those animals. And then we're hoping here on the west side, right, that you're going to have this terrace that's wrapping along, and they're going to get some of the best views of Raleigh towards Dillon, towards the convention center and downtown. On the south is our most challenging point. So we are on the property line, which means, of course, that this phase has to be 3-hour rated. Currently, what we are proposing is wrapping this area with architectural precast panels, and we're looking at using a series of reveals sort of to just break up and create a pattern. This, of course, ties back to sort of the pattern that we had on the parking deck. So we're trying to create some verticality along all sides. And so we're trying to focus into using the reveals on the south side as well. And then we've been given this opportunity, being that this building's so exposed on the south, that we want to use metal panels as a way to create some sort of super graphic, creating some form of direction. You are going to see this building from the highway, and basically as you're approaching Raleigh from the south. So we know that this face is going to be extremely important to the city. So here are some images of the precast, so the idea that we can play with reveals and sort of extrusions to create shadows. So this being on the south side, we can make this wall extremely dramatic. So this right here, these are some sections taken along Wilmington and Lenore. So this first one here, this is Wilmington Street, so you can see the amount of space that we're providing with the parking deck. So we have that office with transparency, the parking deck with the metal panel. You can see that we only have that 1 to 2 foot step back. But again, we believe that we are meeting the intent of providing more light and air movement through the sidewalks and through the cityscape to improve the pedestrian landscape. On Lenore, we do have a small step back or setback here, so that we are providing space for open amenity, again introducing sort of this small plaza for the pedestrians. And then along Lenore Street further down, we have this canopy that's extending out near the hotel entry to kind of mark a spot or a place, create a space. And then we do have the 9 foot step back. So this 9 foot step back here, of course, the reason we aren't allowed to, or we aren't able to go 12 feet is mostly just meeting the hotel standards and understanding what the depths are needed for the unit types. And then further along Lenore Street, we introduce sort of columns with that, we're calling a gallery, where we have the sidewalk with planting benches, and then of course we do have the width necessary for people to walk behind those columns as well. So these are, some of the findings. Again, we believe that we are improving the access to light, air at street level. We are avoiding the canyon effect by using a series of different materials as we go up through the building. On the ground floor, we understand that we're not meeting, or, as in general, we understand that we're not meeting the massing requirement, but on the ground floor, we are providing a setback that is helping widen the sidewalk, and we're also providing a series of seating that can sort of relate back to the building. And we are also providing sort of the public terrace up above that we think we can use as open amenity. So again, here we go with the canyon effect. We have the glass at the bottom, metal, glass, and then we have a different type of metal panel that's going to have a distinct color so that you can actually read it. So really, we're using different materials to separate the different program typologies in this building. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we have the seating that we want to add here towards the entry, the seating along Lenore in front of the hotel lobby to activate that area, and then we're providing sort of plantings in front of the office just to kind of create that buffer and just make the area a bit more welcoming. And that's it.
Thank you for that. You mentioned with regards to the open area, you called it, what are you calling that?
The open amenity?
The amenity on the second level, like the
terrace
area.
Yeah, the amenity terrace.
The sides that are 1 to 2 feet in depth, is that a limitation of the hotel design itself, or would you all have the ability to possibly cantilever the parking deck to allow more space on that level as well?
On the terrace itself, so again, we are trying to go with the step back instead of, the setback instead of the step back to allow for that wider sidewalk on Wilmington.
Okay.
We could push forward, but that does, make that sidewalk a bit tighter, especially because we have the bus station.
So you truncated those sides to give more space below?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Are floors 2 through 5 totally reserved for parking, or is there going to be residential, not residential, but hotel rooms on those floors?
2 through 5 is going to be all for parking, and then 7 through 12 is going to be all hotel. The reason we do need all this parking, again, one of the requirements with Hilton is that we have to try and provide 1-to-1 as close as possible. So we are maximizing it as much as we can. This is a very dense building and a very tiny site, but we have 176 parking spots for 86 units.
You've done an excellent job with this site. I want to congratulate you on that bit. I think that your comment after seeing the last review with the parking deck, get creative. And
Yep.
anybody chime in, please, at any time. I don't know if this is a copy, paste, repeat, but it's similar.
Yeah.
This is similar to a project that we saw not too long ago, kind of a
Well, it's not.
couple
it's
blocks
not,
away.
It's a courtesy.
This is very similar. It's kind of had this, I call it a base, middle, and cap. I mean, it's just a heavier cap and a heavier base. But I appreciate the fact that they're kind of setting this back. We've seen that come before us before. It's been approved. I think that's a smart move to do. I think kind of this force perspective on the lower level is great. I think it's key. You know, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with it. I think it's pretty well done. so.
Agree. Does anybody have any specific suggestions for when we do have review?
I think there's something about the height, the ratio of the ground floor to the deck. I think that like everything, obviously, like
It's very equal.
fifth
Yeah.
floor and up looks
Very
good
equal.
to me. But it seems like it's kind of with the overhang and it, just the way the glazing's rendered here and kind of the height. It doesn't feel like most kind of hotel lobbies that I've walked into where it's just super kind of open and approachable. To me, it feels like the parking on the Blunt Street side is kind of around the Wilmington Street side. The west side is kind of dominating for me a little bit. But I do think, given the circumstance, obviously there's a lot of limitations. I think there's a lot of positive here. I think the sixth floor amenity looks great as a way of meeting the requirements. So I think just for me, that ratio kind of, whether it's playing with the height or playing with the glazing, or it's just something about the relationship between the ground floor and the parking to me that maybe
Makes it
could be improved
minimizes,
a little bit.
yeah. A little more dramatic at the bottom would be nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see this more and more with this kind of middle layer of parking. I mean, it was kind of discussed before, but obviously there's a reason why we're not going down like some other cities. I don't know what that is yet, but
Money.
money. Is it less expensive to build up than down? I don't know.
Any other comments? Okay, please come back.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good job.
All right. We can review the minutes, please, and we'll go ahead and close. If any has any changes, please speak.